In 1984, Gremlins was released in theatres, and if you were to ask me if there was a film that filled me with a warm, safe, fuzzy sense of nostalgia every time I watched it, which you definitely never would, I would say, why, yes, thank you for asking. That film is Gremlins. I did do an initial take where I dropped this, and now there are shards of glass all over the floor. That's what I get for expressing joy. For those not in the know, Gremlins is a horror comedy creature feature that sees a horde of violent and chaotic gremlins wreak havoc on Christmas Eve. The film was a big hit, both critically and commercially. Warner Brothers were very keen on getting Gremlins sequelized, but there was just one problem. Joe Dante, the film's director, had absolutely zero interest in making a sequel.
Not only didn't I think there was any particular reason for a sequel, I was exhausted from doing the first picture, and I said no. They finally came back to me and they said, well, you know, we realize you must have had something to do with the first movie, so tell you what, if you'll give us another Gremlins movie this summer, we'll let you do whatever you want.
And that's exactly what he did. Gremlins 2: The New Batch was essentially a giant middle finger to Warner Brothers, a genuinely funny, well-made satire of modern media and consumerism that poked fun at the original picture, whilst continuously reminding us of the sheer oddity that a Gremlins sequel even existed.
I look at him, you know what I see?
What's that, sir?
Dolls with suction cups staring out car windows. A big float in the Macy's Day Parade. Has anybody ever talked to you about merchandising?
The film is essentially a live-action Looney Tunes cartoon. It even starts with Bugs Bunny and Daffy introducing the film. In a commentary on the Gremlins 2 Blu-ray, Joe Dante says that the film is one of the more unconventional studio pictures ever, and if it weren't for the fact that the studio was in dire need of another one of these movies to put into the can and send to the theatres, I can't conceive of us getting away with this. Gremlins 2 continuously breaks the fourth wall through its meta-contextual writing, and occasionally just having the gremlins escape the film itself.
Those things have taken over the projector! They refuse to show the rest of the film!
Gremlins 2 is a great example of meta-writing and meta-humor because on one side you have a director that did not want to make this film, and on the other you have a studio that in response to that said, well, we'll let you have complete creative control, just please make it. And I think that acted as a catalyst for a really unique experience. Meaning that the deconstruction and satirization of itself and the wider culture of capital, media, and advertising feels incredibly genuine. But despite this, the film is still absolutely bursting with creativity and establishes itself as an original work that stands uniquely apart from its predecessor, perfectly matching that chaotic gremlin nature. Now, I've recently been rewatching Stranger Things, and there was a line in Series 2 that I had completely forgotten about. After Lucas recaps the events of Series 1 to newcomer Max, the character says this.
I mean, I had a few issues.
Issues?
I just felt it was a little derivative in parts, but...
What are you talking about?
I just wish it had a little more originality, that's all.
Although the scene does contextualize the use of meta-commentary here, it feels very out of character for Max to say something like this. This sort of pseudo-self-referential humor, which essentially provides a platform for the writers to voice criticisms of their own show, I think feels very out of place in something like Stranger Things. And I say pseudo here because they don't highlight this criticism to seriously refute or address it. They simply acknowledge the fact that some people think Stranger Things is derivative of 80s media and move on. Ultimately, it's a very harmless moment in a much bigger series, but it did get me thinking of other more contemporary uses of fourth wall breaks that I'm not such a big fan of. Despite the provocative title, this is not an attack on Deadpool as a film. I actually think both films are just fine. There's so many jokes thrown at you within the runtime that you're guaranteed at least one or two laughs.
All these elderly white men on the walls. Should have brought my rape whistle.
This is purely an examination of how Deadpool makes use of the fourth wall as a filmmaking technique. And this isn't me policing whether something is right or wrong for breaking the fourth wall. It's more of an examination of how meta writing can really elevate a film's ability to communicate certain ideas to its audience.
Fourth wall break inside a fourth wall break. That's like 16 walls.
For the most part, Deadpool's fourth wall is simply used as another way to deliver jokes. Fleabag utilizes the fourth wall in a similar way to Deadpool. To begin with, it's mostly used as a vehicle for jokes. However, the direct address creates a unique form of comedy separate to the rest of the show as it gives us access to her inner thoughts. The jokes often stem from a direct contrast to her interactions with others, or an instant insight that the character wouldn't otherwise vocalize.
I'm just gonna ask her. I'm just gonna ask her. Just gonna come.
Do you need to borrow money?
No. Can't do it. Can't do it.
You around later?
Yes. Fucking yes, please. Yes. Yes.
It's kind of like how mockumentary sitcoms will often utilize those talking head pieces to immediately contradict or shed light on what a character has previously said within a scene.
You're talking about me in Morse code.
Yeah, that's what we're doing. In our very limited free time and with our very limited budget, we went and got a nanny, and then we went out and took a class on a very outmoded and very unnecessary form of communication just so we could talk about you in front of you.
Yep, that's exactly what we did.
Some call this a cheap trick, but you can't deny the cutaway does have a separate purpose. This is something that Ferris Bueller's Day Off, a film Deadpool directly references in its post-credit sequence, also does effectively. Ferris is a bit of a bullshitter when it comes to interacting with others, and his direct address with the audience is when he's at his most honest. It provides us with extra insight. In Deadpool, he is a constant walking, talking meta joke dispenser, so I never get the sense that there are any differences between the jokes he cracks within the scene and those he tells via direct address, which is actually kind of highlighted in this exchange.
They're all lame-ass teachers' pets.
You know I can hear you.
Wasn't talking to you. I was talking to them.
I don't think there is anything necessarily wrong with this, and I know the source material explains that the character's ability to break the fourth wall is something of a delusion, which is why other people can hear him doing it. But when it comes to the context of the film, I think it makes the humour feel kind of one note. With Fleabag, the direct address means we essentially have two things happening at once. The comedy and dialogue within the scene, and the comedy that comes from her breaking the scene via direct address, the latter often playing off or contradicting the former. It's creative and keeps things feeling fresh. Fleabag's fourth wall invites the audience to understand her in a way that other characters can't. It provides a more intimate form of comedy. With Deadpool, his connection to the audience doesn't feel any different to his connection with other characters that inhabit the world of the film. And not to harp on about Fleabag, but I think the development of its direct address is really interesting. It begins as a tool that is used solely for comedy, and then as the show evolves, it becomes an integral part of the character's journey. In Series 2, we see that Fleabag's ability to break the fourth wall begins to crumble as her relationship with the hot priest becomes more intimate. Usually acting as a blanket or coping mechanism to hide her true feelings, the direct address is no longer a necessary escape as she learns to grow and be vulnerable with others.
Tell me, come on, tell me.
Nothing. Nothing. No, stop.
Fleabag literally waves goodbye to the audience in the final shot of the show, demonstrating how the character no longer requires whatever unhealthy reliance she had on us, I suppose. This is a super creative way to play with the form and allow elements of the creative process to mature with the central character. The very nature of Deadpool's character is such fertile ground for this sort of unconventional, adventurous filmmaking, and its place as a comedy means it could be even more experimental and on the nose. Imagine a classic end of Act 2 Fallout scene where, in addition to having conflict and parting ways with another character, like Deadpool does with Rusty in the sequel, he also falls out with the audience because he can see they think he's in the wrong at this point. Deadpool 2 shows the character forming this unlikely family dynamic by the end of the film. Maybe, like Fleabag, this makes him less reliant on or changes his relationship with the fourth wall in some way, as he is no longer as much of an outsider. But given how the character seems to interact and develop a relationship with the audience...
Oh, hello. I know, right? Whose balls did I have to fondle to get my very own movie? And that's exactly what this is, a love story. And to tell it right, I gotta take you back to long before I squeeze this ass into red spandex. You might want to look away for this.
I can't help but feel there's more room to play with this intertextual dynamic. Take something like 24-Hour Party People, for example. Tony Wilson, the film's protagonist, also real human being, it's weird to refer to him as a protagonist, breaks the fourth wall throughout the film to tell his story. It's clear he's building a fictitious version of himself, and the events we're watching aren't entirely true. He's an unreliable narrator focused on reputation and legacy, which strongly aligns with the identity of his character, something that is important to the narrative and is communicated effectively through his ability to address the audience.
You're going to be seeing a lot more of that sort of thing in the film, although that actually did happen. Obviously it's symbolic, it works on both levels. I don't want to tell you too much, don't want to spoil the film, but I'll just say Icarus, okay? If you know what I mean, great, if you don't, it doesn't matter, but you should probably read more.
But if we're more superficial for a second and pull back to something a little closer to home for Deadpool, then Ant-Man also illustrates a really engaging way for characters to recount events in their own unique and subjective voice.
Carlos says, yo man, this guy's got a big ass safe just sitting in the basement, just chilling.
Deadpool is already breaking the fourth wall and dictating the narrative, making use of similar visual and oral elements not afforded to his comic book counterpart once in a while could help to sew this part of his character into the DNA of the film, creating something that is unique to the medium. For example, using Deadpool's role as the narrator to sort of inhabit a character like Ajax, who acts as an incubator for the retrodden origin story section of the film and speaks in villainous cliches, would mean you could slip into an over-the-top caricature of these roles, pointing out and satirizing those formulaic elements, whilst also contextualizing the fact that Deadpool is recounting the story, a biased version of events. Even a character like Colossus, someone Deadpool heavily dislikes,
Look, Colossus, I don't have time for the goody two-shoes bullshit right now.
could have his dialogue hijacked by Deadpool once in a while, mocking his heroic and traditional superhero monologues, whilst also helping to communicate his dislike for the character narratively. We do get one other instance of a character dipping their toes into a Deadpool-esque meta moment, but nothing that substantially suggests we're living in the world of an unreliable narrator.
And that guy over there came in looking for you. Real Grim Reaper type. I don't know, might further the plot.
But maybe Deadpool simply doesn't care about all of this narrative shit. It's a comedy, the main objective is to make you laugh, and the fourth wall breaking and meta humour is just a tool to poke fun at and satirize other superhero media, and it does that effectively, right? Well, kind of. There's some pretty fun sequences born out of the fact that Deadpool is immortal, and there's quite a lot of swearing, but other than that, I can't help but feel like I'm watching any other superhero flick. Only this time the main character occasionally turns to the camera and points out the tropes as they happen in real time. Like, their assessment of superhero cliches are often all correct. Take, for example, this moment in a classic third act punch-up.
Hey! Pick on someone your own size.
That's such a you thing to say. Go get him, Tiger! Big CGI fight coming up!
But then we do just get given a somewhat generic CGI fight scene. They don't do anything to subvert this, they just point out the fact that a lot of other superhero films have generic CGI fights in the third act. Let's reflect for a moment upon other comedy films that set out on a similar mission to satirize elements of their genre through meta-humor. The Jump Street films actively parody blockbuster franchises by playing on the audience's expectations and subverting them.
What happened? I don't know, it just didn't explode. That's weird. Huh?
This chase scene doesn't just have something explode and a character points out how cliche that is. It's an original and funny bit of action that makes the satire all the more palpable. We're not simply subjected to a boring action sequence to point out how a lot of action films have boring action sequences. The film's even more self-aware sequel, 22 Jump Street, has a fantastic end credit sequence that lampoons the nature of franchise filmmaking. Convoluted sequels, contract disputes, nostalgia grabs, action figures, video games, animated television shows. The comedy and creativity on display here feels like the exact sort of thing Deadpool exists to do. There are a myriad of other less contemporary examples. Funny Games, a truly disturbing film I cannot recommend to anyone, also uses the fourth wall to actively challenge the audience in a similar way to Man Bites Dog, and basically asks, why are you even still watching this? And I'd be pretty remiss not to mention Scream in this video. Although it doesn't fully break the fourth wall, it certainly heavily flirts with the idea, and it uses tropes of horror slasher films to create some really original and iconic moments.
Behind you. Oh, turn. Behind you. Behind you.
The opening to Deadpool was a creative breakdown of all the usual sour ingredients of a superhero film, and promised a pretty effective satire. But by the end of the film, it ultimately acts as an illustration of the particular problems I have with its meta-humor. The film deconstructs all of these elements without then going on to subvert or play with them. The title cards are pretty accurate in their assessment of the characters, and that's what we get.
Superhero landing. You gonna do a superhero landing? Wait for it!
Woo! Superhero landing!
Yeah, that's really hard on your knees.
Totally impractical, they all do it.
Here's a very similar scene from Kick-Ass, a film that also pokes fun at the nature of superhero media. Now, I find this funny because of the instant subversion from what we would usually expect in the context of a scene like this. Whereas in Deadpool,
superhero landing!
It's already pointing out something that we're already aware of, a common trope and bit of iconography that they don't subvert or transform in any way. Deadpool simply acknowledges that the trope has occurred, which for me doesn't land as an especially funny or creative gag. If you wanted to subvert or mock this trope, then maybe having the character do the superhero landing and actually fucking up her knees might be a more apt way to present this. Maybe that landing even impairs the character in some way, affecting her in the end battle punch-up, you know, incorporating and layering that meta-humor into the film as it plays out. The reason I referred to Gremlins 2 at the start of this video is because I think spiritually it has a very similar mission statement to something like Deadpool, a chaotic, studio-backed production that deconstructs elements of its own existence. The main difference between these two projects is that Joe Dante was not planning for a Gremlins 3. He didn't even want to initially make Gremlins 2. Deadpool has the air of something that feels rebellious by virtue of the fact it has adult humor and acknowledges the faults of superhero movies. But Deadpool also needs to be a part of the thing it's criticizing to succeed. It's a brand, a franchise, and most of the meta-humor is used in a Big Bang Theory-esque way, simply acknowledging other superhero media exists without much of a joke or commentary layered behind it.
You're so dark! The Jaina from the DC universe!
The phrase, "don't shit where you eat," springs to mind.
Why not travel back to when he was a baby, kill him then? Or better yet, head back a little further, kill baby Hitler.
I got 2 charges, one to get me here, one to get me home.
Well, that's just lazy writing.
But of course, this isn't actually an example of lazy writing. Stakes and limitations add conflict and engage you more with the narrative. It's a perfectly fine thing to do. I don't think Cable explaining why he only has 2 charges left would really add anything to the film. And I think within the world of Deadpool, it's perfectly fine to believe this is a thing. They're not actually going to start pointing out the real foibles of the film's writing here, like some of the ones I've highlighted in this video, because it doesn't act in their interest as a franchise to do so. Weirdly, Marvel has been making very similar meta-esque jokes for a while now, only when they tell them they don't turn to the camera most of the time. Take this scene from The Avengers, for example.
I am a god, you dull creature, and I will not be bullied by
Now, compare that to this scene from Deadpool.
Spare an enemy. In these moments, everything else falls away. The way the world sees us. the way we...
I think both of these are funny, and is an example of Deadpool layering a commentary about the genre's tendency to deliver these grandstanding monologues without pausing the film to be like, oh hey, this guy's doing a pretty boring monologue right now. Am I right? But when I watch a scene from the sort of franchise that Deadpool is poking fun at, making the exact same joke 4 years prior, it makes me question the film's freshness as an edgy alternative to the mainstream. And to be honest, I think this is going to be a problem for any filmmaker looking to lampoon superhero media within a studio setup, because unless you're willing to make fun of the increased lack of imagination we've been seeing, or the industrial-like way these things are churned out, which something like Deadpool isn't going to do, hand that feeds you is another phrase that springs to mind, then I think you're going to find a lot of these meta-esque Marvel jokes have already beaten you to the punch. It's been talked about to death and probably overstated somewhat, but Marvel specifically has a lot of jokes that break the pace of the scene to be kind of self-aware. It's not quite meta, but it certainly seems to be the filmmakers letting you know they're not taking themselves too seriously.
If he asked me to burn the world down, I would have asked him.
Beef or vegetarian? Roll out of the chicken, so I can only offer you beef or vegetarian.
In a 15 years later reunion chat for Iron Man, Kevin Feige says something very interesting regarding the comedy in Marvel films.
When the audience opens themselves up to laughter, you can then also sneak them in with the emotion. When they were laughing, you knew they were in.
Yeah.
With Iron Man being the first film produced by Marvel, it made sense to have this mentality. Superhero films had not quite hit their big boom, and in order to win audiences over to something that could be perceived as laughable, you beat them to the laughter yourself. Here's a quote from Joe Russo, Endgame co-director, on Feige's insistence for comedy. He likes to sit in the test screenings and hear the response. You can understand, okay, every 2 minutes they are getting some enjoyment out of the movie, and that's a strong way for him to gauge how the movie will perform with an audience, right? So I think humour is very important to him. I think this idea of, oh, if the audience are laughing at something, we're getting away with something else, is really interesting because it has the potential to highlight the fact that the filmmaker doesn't have a lot of confidence in what they're presenting to you. And I think it's actually a tool to deflect criticism in a similar way to something like Deadpool. Although Deadpool works fine as an enjoyable comedy film with violence and dick jokes, and it's good to have a film like this break the mold even superficially to add any sort of variety, I feel as though fourth wall breaking works best when it has a point. What is it adding? How does it allow us to learn more about the character? Meta humor and self-referential jokes hit hardest when they have a point. Who or what is the target? How is it meant to make the audience feel about the media they're watching, and does it elevate the film or show into something better? I think sometimes meta humor can be used as a lampshading tool to deflect criticism or appear as though you're saying more than you actually are. And I think that's a shame because the artistic and creative possibilities on the table when you open your film's world up in that way are kind of endless. Something like Gremlins 2 took genuine creative risks within its subversive meta nature. It broke away from the conventions that made the original such a smash hit, incorporating the concept of media monopoly into its narrative whilst playing with the almost limitless framework it had set for itself. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, subscribe. If you didn't like it, if you hated it, if this video enraged you, smash that dislike button. Bye. Bye.